welcome. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training, and welcome to this whiteboard where we're going to be talking about lordosis treatment, a 3-step process. Now, this is a process that I use with people on a one-to-one basis when I work with them with lordosis. It's also embedded in my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week program, and I want to share this process with you so you can then go about self-coaching yourself if that's what you so wish to do. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about what is lordosis. So I'm going to lay a little bit of a foundation, build some building blocks. So when I come on to the 3-step process, which is stretch, exercise, and everyday activities, you can then start applying those principles and I can start relating back to them as I'm talking you through the 3-step process. Now, before I get into that, just want to mention my social media, which is Twitter at Christopher Holt, Facebook, Christopher Holt Training, and Christopher Holt on Instagram. Now, you can come along there, like and follow. It'd be great to have you there. Alternatively, you can go to the website, which is christopherholttraining.com, and you can find out more about my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week program. Now, if you go to christopherholttraining.com/p/correct-lordosis, you can go there, you can find out more about the program, you can find out how it's delivered, you can find out some of the benefits that you'll gain from it, some of the indirect benefits that you'll gain from it, and then you can obviously get involved in it when you so choose to. So yeah, again, please do come along there, get involved in the program. It'd be great to have you on board. So back to today's whiteboard. What we're going to do first is go straight on to slide number 1, which is talk about lordosis itself. What I want to do first is talk about lordosis itself, then I'm going to talk about an area of the body that's closely associated, and then I'm going to move on to the muscles that are involved. So first of all, what is lordosis? Well, it's an exaggerated curve of the lumbar spine. So if we come across to this first diagram here, you can see there is a normal curve to the lumbar spine. That's known as a lordotic curve. What we then have is an exaggerated curve of the lumbar spine on this diagram here. Now, this is where we get or have the condition called lordosis, when we get that exaggerated curve of the lumbar spine. So the associated area is the pelvis. So you've got the lumbar spine and then you've got the pelvis. And the condition is the anterior pelvic tilt. Now, what we have when it comes to lordosis and the exaggerated curve is we know the muscle, the psoas. And the muscle, the psoas, becomes tight and it pulls on the front of the spine or the lumbar spine and creates that exaggerated curve. Now, when we move on to the anterior pelvic tilt, we then have to talk about the iliacus and the rectus femoris, because it's the rectus femoris that attaches onto the front tip of the pelvis, that if it becomes tight, it can pull on the front side of the pelvis and pull it forward and down. The same with the iliacus. The iliacus attaches to the front side of the pelvis on the inside of the bowl, and then if that becomes tight, it can pull the pelvis forward. Now, if the psoas is tight, it will pull on the front side of the lumbar spine, creating the exaggerated curve. If the rectus femoris and the iliacus are tight, that will pull on the pelvis and pull it into the anterior pelvic tilt. As a consequence of that will create an exaggerated curve at the lumbar spine. So when we're talking about muscles involved, certainly with the with lordosis, it's the psoas. If it's anterior pelvic tilt as well, it's the iliacus and the rectus femoris. So when we're talking about stretching, these are the 3 muscles that we want to be focusing on. Now, as a sort of an indirect and slightly sort of further away from it all, the adductors can become tight, and they're the muscles on the inside of the leg. So again, when we're talking about stretching, these are another muscle group that we want to be focusing on with regards to stretching. Then we finally come on to the gluteal group and the abdominals. Now, the gluteal group is the muscles of the hip, so the glute max, the glute medius, and the glute minimus. The abdominals as well, all of these muscles can become less active. So if we come back over to this diagram here, you can see you've got a flat stomach or a flatter stomach here, and then you've got a more arched and bulging stomach here. So this is the abdominal muscles not being pulled in tight. So if we can pull in tight the abdominals, we'll start to be able to flatten the spine. This will then assist in stretching the muscles. What we've also got is the gluteal group. Now, the gluteal group They're more associated with the anterior pelvic tilt, but also again indirectly associated with the flattening of the spine or creating the more normal lordotic curve of the spine. So if we can activate these two muscle groups, we'll flatten off the abdominals, again flattening the lumbar spine, and we'll be able to bring the pelvis into a more of a neutral position, again flattening the spine. So when we're talking about stretch, exercise and everyday activity, these are the muscles that we want to be focusing on. So when we go on to the next slide, I'm going to be talking more about the stretches, the exercises and the activities that will enhance or sort of stretch these muscles and enhance the activity of these two muscles down here. So that's what we'll do in the next slide. So let's click through. As I've mentioned before, the 3-step process that's embedded in whoever I work with Lordosis, it's embedded in my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week program, is stretch, exercise and everyday activity. Now it's these 3 steps. First of all, we need to stretch tight muscles with stretching, and then we need to activate inactive muscles with exercise. But what we need to be able to do as well is in everyday activity, we need to position the pelvis and the spine. Because if we think about it, we might only be doing stretching and exercising 3 times a week, 4 times a week, or 5 times a week, which might only be an hour long. So that's 3, 4, or 5 hours of lordosis correction, if you will. Whereas everyday activity, we're doing this the other 23 hours, or the other 16 hours if we take sleep out. Now, what we have to understand is that this is where the real embedding takes place in the everyday activity. We can train it and enhance it during the stretching and the exercise, but it's the everyday activity that really takes it to the next level. So when we're talking about everyday activity, we're talking about flattening the spine and lifting the pelvis, and then finally turning the knees out. Now, what we need to do before we talk about how we do that, we need to talk about the stretching, because this is where we can really take some formal time to actually sit down and concentrate on all of those positions. So with the stretching, we need to loosen the tight muscles, and the tight muscles we talked about is the psoas, the iliacus, the rectus femoris and the adductors. So we need to go and find stretches that bring together all of those muscles so we're able to stretch them and loosen them off. What that then does, that then gives us the space to be able to activate the inactive muscles, so the gluteal group. Because if we just go and do exercise, we're trying to work against tight muscles. With the stretching and the exercise together, we loosen off the muscles, we create some extra range of movement within them, and then what we're then going to be able to do is then move within that. So we activate the gluteal group, we activate the abdominals within the newly created range of movement that we've created with the stretching. So the stretches that we would talk about is this kind of stretch here. This is a stretch for the psoas and the iliacus. Now, if we want to bring in the rectus femoris, we would lift this back foot from the floor. If we then want to bring in the adductors, we would then push this front knee out to the side. So we can hit all of those in one stretch, and then we can break them up into one individual stretch each, giving them sort of the, let's just say, the maximum amount of stretching that we can give them within a program. When we then move on to the exercises, we need to start thinking about glute exercises, so bridging, hip thrusting, and abdominal exercises like planking and side planking, like in this diagram here, or this image here. What that then gives us is the ability to get into that position of a normal curve of the lumbar spine. It lifts our pelvis into position, and then it allows us to turn our knees out. So what we're then doing is we're flattening the spine, so that's lengthening the psoas. We're lifting the pelvis, that's lengthening the rectus femoris and the iliacus, and then we're turning the knees out, which is lengthening the adductor muscles as well. So all of those together, brought together in everyday activity. So as we're stood in a queue, as we are walking, we can start to think about, am I pulling my abdominals in, flattening my spine? Am I engaging my glute muscles to flatten and bring my pelvis into a neutral position? And am I turning my knees out to activate and lengthen the adductor muscles. So it's using these 3 steps all together in one congruent, coherent process that is going to help us overcome lordosis. If we just stretch, we're not going to get the maximum from it. If we just do exercise, we're not going to get the maximum from it. And if we just do everyday activity, we're not going to get the maximum from it. What we have to do is bring all these steps together into a 3-step process, into not only a formal way of doing it in a workout program, but also expanding that out into everyday life, so we can then go about managing the position of our pelvis, managing the position of our spine to be able to correct it over an extended period of time. And then eventually what will start happening, it will start loosening off, and then we'll start to be able to stay in that position for longer periods of time and therefore come out of that lordotic posture. So hopefully that's brought some light onto the 3-step process. Again, like I mentioned, come to social media. I'm talking about it on there. You can find out more about it on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, or alternatively come to the website and just get involved in the program. It'd be great to have you on board. So many thanks for listening. Many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Hall Training. I'll speak to you in the next video.